I have never played anything like Control. Now, I know this game came out a while ago, and I know I'm late to the party, but man, after playing through this game on stream, twitch.tv/sweetmoses by the way, I know how to make a video on it because, again, I never played anything like Control.
You called me. So here I am.
It's hard for me to even know what to talk about when trying to review this game because it's so different than anything and I have really no comparisons. So let's just break Control down into its simple video game components, starting with gameplay. Control is a single-player, third-person action shooter. However, instead of using a traditional gun, you wield the service weapon, which is an otherworldly gun that never runs out of ammo. Instead, you need to recharge its ammo on a sort of cooldown. So if you shoot too quickly and use the whole mag, you have to wait for it to recharge. The service weapon can also shapeshift, with it starting as a fairly standard single-shot pistol, but it can take the form of a machine gun, shotgun, sniper, grenade launcher, and pretty much whichever form of the gun you want to use is entirely up to you, assuming that you have the materials to craft the weapon form that you want. The enemies you fight come in various different forms, some simple soldier type guys, horribly deformed exploding creatures, telekinetic levitating guys strapped to chairs, spheres, because why not? Well, there's a good variety of enemies. You are introduced to all of them pretty early on, so once you learn how to fight and take them down, the different enemy types aren't as much of a surprise anymore. Your service weapon isn't the only tool at your disposal, however. The character you play as, Jessie, has various telekinetic abilities at her disposal. You can lift items to hurl your enemies, you can levitate, you can lift debris as a shield and then hurl it at your enemies. You have a melee force push. There are so many ways to approach combat, and it all feels immensely destructive and looks incredible. Control is easily the best third-person action shooter I have ever played from a mechanical standpoint. Each fight in the game is just challenging enough to keep you interested while still feeling like the incredibly powerful character that you are. The service weapon ammo recharge blends perfectly together with your telekinetic abilities. For the gameplay and combat alone, I would recommend playing through Control because it truly is third-person action at its absolute best. So now let's talk about just the setting and just the graphics of this game. Graphically, Control just outright looks great. And going right along with that graphical fidelity is the actual setting of the game. The entire game takes place within the Federal Bureau of Control, which at first glance is just a 1960s old office building, but you quickly learn and see that it's much more than that. The setting seamlessly goes between these simple office building to monolithic MC Escher-like environments, and most impressively, the game melds these design elements perfectly, with the different areas of the map never feeling super jarring or disconnected from one another, despite how different these settings are. Control is a truly unique looking game. The setting and design choices have so much character that there's, again, like no comparisons I could really make to try to convey better what the setting is other than you just seeing it on screen. But the MC Escher meets 1960s office building is a pretty good comparison in my mind. Now let's talk about the story, because that's important in a single player narrative driven game, and unfortunately it's not so hot. You play as Jessie, who harbors this sort of spirit called Polaris within her, which is where she gets her powers from, and your goal as Jessie is to save your brother from the Federal Bureau of Control. However, very quickly she finds herself the new director of the Bureau, which pretty much means she's kind of in charge, and she is responsible for fighting against and restraining the Hiss, which the Hiss is kind of the main enemy throughout the game. It's a sort of paranormal virus that has infected many Bureau employees, which pretty much turns them against you. Throughout the game, while fighting against the Hiss and exploring the Bureau, you will find objects of power, which are regular, everyday objects like telephones, floppy disks, refrigerators, that just happen to house extreme otherworldly powers, similar to things you would see in the SCP Foundation if you happen to be into that sort of mythos. Throughout all of this, there are cutscenes and dialogue between characters that honestly don't really do much to explain what's happening, and if anything, they add a lot more questions than they do answers. However, throughout your playthrough, you will find a ton of logs and records within it that further explain just what the Federal Bureau of Control is and all the crazy stuff within it. These readings and audio recordings are genuinely interesting due to the otherwise unexplained weirdness of everything during the actual game, which is a shame because I know that there are players that are going to collect these things and just never read them or pay attention to them, and unfortunately, the story told outside of these lore readings and extra records, the mainline story that's told to you through these cutscenes and throughout your playthrough, is not so great. Throughout the game, you meet various characters that progress the story forward and give you objectives, both mainline quests and side quests, but the problem is that none of these characters are actually interesting or memorable, with the one exception of the janitor.
Did you miss me? Did you have peace in your song?
What?
Yes. No. Bark don't make a wound. You did good. Take my cassette player. You can borrow it. The song is a present from my friends to you. It will get you through the maze so you can do your job.
Not to mention that your character, the main protagonist, Jesse, is also not that interesting either. Obviously, I won't talk about specific story beats because of spoilers, but in my opinion, the story that Control has to tell is actually a decently interesting one with a lot of potential, but it's delivered and told in the most uninteresting way possible. For example, throughout any conversation of dialogue, the game constantly cuts to Jesse's inner thoughts, making it so that the player is not only seeing the conversation happen between two characters on screen, but it also zooms into Jesse's own personal thoughts throughout it.
I check myself, but I don't have access to most of them.
Sounds like I touched
Jesus,
it.
these textures need a load.
He didn't let you
Good
in
God.
his labs? Not all. Some had volatile, ridiculous. I mean, could have at least thought up a more convincing.
Alright, I don't care about what she has to say.
See you soon. Be careful out there.
Now, as a design choice in the delivery of the story, I actually kind of like it. I think it fits the sort of weirdness and feel of the Control. The problem is that none of Jesse's inner thoughts, or the conversations that are happening anyway for that matter, are really interesting at all. There's no air of mystery or figuring things out within the dialogue. It's very video gamey, and it's pretty much either an explanation on why you're going to the next objective, or it's being super vague and super mysterious, but for no real reason. This in a single-player story-driven game is obviously not a good thing, and it's a real shame considering the interesting and wonderfully mysterious setting that Control has and takes place in. One other complaint I have is the side quests. Now, the side quests themselves are actually fantastic. In fact, the only actual boss fights take place in these side quests. Throughout the main story, there's not, at least as far as I can remember, no bosses you fight. Some characters and like enemies are introduced as kind of mini bosses, but then they just turn out to be general parts of the crowds of enemies you fight later on in the game, so it really doesn't matter. And the issue is that these side quests are completely disconnected from the mainline story, and again, they're side quests, so they're optional. So the only way to experience these things is for players to go and discover them by searching around the map or going back to speak to specific NPCs. And I just don't understand why the developers chose to put the best interesting fights and puzzles in these optional side quests and just not carrying any of that interestingness over into the mainline story that players are coming to the game for. And again, it's just a shame because I know there's players that are just going to play through the mainline story and just not going to experience any of the other fight pieces and puzzles that are in the game because they're optional. Now, with all that being said, I did genuinely enjoy Control a lot, and I'm disappointed in myself waiting so long to play this since it came out back in 2019. And despite having a lackluster story and a story-driven game, the just raw gameplay and world that Control builds and takes place in is enough for this game to really leave a lasting impression, and I 100% would recommend playing Control. Now, I do want to quickly point out that I have not played the DLC for Control yet, although I do plan to, because again, I really did enjoy this game. So there may be a follow-up video just covering the DLC and the content that is in that. But as far as this review here, this is just for the base game Control. Alright, and there's a Control Moses Monocle. As always, let me know what you guys think. Any feedback in the comments just about the video or what you guys think of Control if you played it. And again, as always, let me know any games you guys would want me to cover in the future, whether it's new games or games that I just haven't played yet. Also, like I said earlier, check out the Twitch. Twitch is where I played through all of Control live on stream. So if you want to be there for that, as well as just me playing general other games with my friends, then the link is in the description as always. I'll see you guys in the next one.